Hello there, and welcome to another episode of the Long Live Rock and Roll podcast. As usual, your hosts are with you, Mr. Laz Felipe, on the screen opposite me, Mr. Felipe Amarim. How are you doing, bro?
Oh, good, bro. How's everyone doing? Hope you guys are having a good time.
Yeah, it's all autumny now, isn't it? What's it like in London? Is it all rainy or is it okay?
It's warmer than I expected, to be honest. I thought it would be really, really cold by now. It's pretty cool, yeah. And here in Soho, it's a lovely day, and I'm thinking about going out for a coffee at some point. But I'm having my third cup of coffee at home now, so
Fantastic.
I'm having the fourth cup of coffee in the streets at some point.
The drink of the day has been established. Welcome back to the show. Today we're doing another album episode, and I thought I'd explain to you guys why we're doing some albums. Me and Felipe thought that actually, if we talk about bands, you can only talk about them once and then you move on, isn't it? Sometimes it's like, I didn't want sort of the earliest episodes of our podcast to sort of get, and we tick off all the bands we love, and suddenly 2 years into the podcast we don't have any more bands to talk about. Whereas albums, there are plenty of them. Trust me,
loads. And even some albums that from bands that we're not big fans, but still like the album.
And we're getting recommendations. People are saying to us, "You should do this album," and I'm loving it because I'm hearing so much new music from this. This rock and roll era that we're talking about, which I think we're kind of classing from the 50s through to nowadays. Our definition of rock and roll is musical freedom, so it can be whatever and whenever. But these kind of 60s, 70s, 80s albums that people are saying and that you're recommending as well, bro, they've just been wicked. But albums are more plentiful, and a band who has plenty of them is who we are talking about today. So the band in question are the Rolling Stones, and we are talking about their 1967 album, Between the Buttons. And I was going to say it was the fifth album of theirs, but on closer inspection on my notes, it's actually the fifth UK album and the seventh album. Do you have anything to say about that? Because I couldn't really understand it. How do they release an album in the US but not in the UK? What was it like back then? Do you have any insight?
I think that was really common with the Beatles as well, because they had some special albums for America, like compilations and stuff, I guess. And because of singles, or the nature of releasing music at the time was entirely based on the singles model.
Yes.
So you release a single and then you release an album. And there's some weird things that happen in that sense, like the single of this album, Let's Spend the Night Together, it's part of the American version of the album, but it's not on the UK's version of the album. So I think you would have to go album by album. But with the Stones and the Beatles, what happened a lot was they had some singles released in the UK that were not part of the albums. They had some songs released in some albums that were not that were not released in the UK or not released in America. Yeah. And from time to time, there would be compilations of singles that would become an album only in America, or I think, So, or maybe like after the band was popular in a country, they would release introducing the band as an album, kind of stuff in America. So it's very confusing. Really, I've compared the different versions of this album, and it's like the track list is different. Why? I mean, I understand not having some songs,
but different orders as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's a different track list. Like, this song is somewhere else. I don't know why. I mean, you have to imagine the people behind the record labels at the time in America were probably thinking, the American audiences are different. Maybe they need to listen to the hits first, or whatever. Yeah. I don't know. I have no idea why those decisions were made, but I'm pretty sure the band wasn't totally in charge of making that artistic decision, because it becomes an artistic decision, changing the order of the songs.
Well, it's funny because when I was doing some reading about this album, Mick Jagger said that he basically said that it was an album that was meant to be an album. It wasn't. He said it's a sound experience rather than a song experience, which to me tells me that it's the overall album that you got to listen to, not individual songs. And we spoke about this on one of the episodes where we did Rubber Soul by the Beatles.
Yeah,
we established that was one of the first pop albums, if you like, that was an album for the sake of an album experience and not just 11 singles put together on one CD or vinyl. And that's really interesting because he has said that it was a sound experience rather than a song experience. But everything you said goes against that, because if you make a sound experience, then things like track listing and where this track goes on the album matters. And so for the label or whoever was in charge to just switch things around wherever they felt necessary is kind of odd, isn't it?
It is, because they thinking in a commercial way, whilst the music that's a really like that's a classic kind of conflict between artists and labels, isn't it? Like you have the artistic view and you have the commercial view, and they never seem to find a middle ground. It's always a bit like, oh, I want it to be like this. This is the right way, and the label says no, this is the right way because that's going to sell. And it's like, and it's obviously we understand. I mean, I understand the importance of making something commercially viable. On the other hand, do record labels really know what people want, or they just guess, or they just because the thing is, like, is what Henry Ford said about cars. He said, well, if I asked people's opinion, they would ask me to bring them faster horses instead of cars, because no one knew what a car was like. So it's. You when you're producing an album as creative as this one, I think you're just trying to deliver something that people never heard before.
Yeah. So
how can the label know what is commercial and what is not commercial from the album? I think they did make a good choice. Maybe the band was involved with the single, although the result wasn't expected, because they released Let's Spend the Night Together as the A side and Ruby Tuesday as the B side, but Ruby Tuesday went #1.
Did it really? Oh, yeah, I thought they both did, but no, you're right. Yeah, they didn't.
No, it was the 4th #1 hit the Stones had in America. So.
Ruby Tuesday is just, it might be one of my top 20 songs of all time. I think it's a really stunning song.
It's perfect.
It is, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
That beautiful piano behind it is just so nice. But that is funny, isn't it? The song they chose as the B-side was the more successful one.
Yeah, because again, you don't know what people are actually going to like.
Yeah.
And apparently in America, the radios were they played an important role on pushing for Ruby Tuesday instead of Let's Spend the Night Together, because Let's Spend the Night Together has a very sexual nature on the lyrics, and some maybe some more conservative minds were like, oh, this is not cool. We're not going to, Ruby Tuesday is kind of exactly, will be shocking or whatever. And there's if I don't know if you know the Ed Sullivan Show story about that song.
I don't know the story. No, go on, tell us.
Oh, I'll tell you that. So that's a really cool one. So basically, they were about to perform. That was I think it was in '67. Yeah. They were about to perform Let's Spend the Night Together, and Sullivan said, no, that's too sexual. We can't say Let's Spend the Night Together. See, it doesn't even sound that bad nowadays.
Yeah.
But it's like you can't say that on my show. So either the song goes or you go. So Ed Sullivan said that. So they changed the lyrics to Let's Spend Some Time Together. I mean, if making that concession is a good thing, or if it's rock and roll or not, it can even be seen for me as we found a way out of it, and we're making a point here. I think it was cool that they actually did that instead of simply not performing. I think it was a good idea.
I think it's funny. Let's Spend the Night Together is the most Rolling Stones song on the album, as in you just hear it and it's just, you've got that kind of, you've got the rock and roll feel to it, the driving beat that goes through it. It's got some, I don't know, bluesy instrumentation and tone, but it's not a blues song. And it just has that upbeat pop rock vibe, doesn't it?
It does. Really there's a bit of I see the drumming on that song specifically as a heavy Motown.
Yeah, I heard that throughout the album, and the drums throughout the album have been incredible. Before we talk about songs, I'll just give you the Laz info bit. So the album is Between the Buttons by the Rolling Stones, released 20th of January 1967, recorded between August and December 1966. So that's quite a lengthy recording process. It was done between the RCA studio in Hollywood and the IBC in London. And this is what I wanted to talk about, is the genres associated with it. So there were three main ones that I came across, and that was pop rock, psychedelic rock, and baroque pop. So pop rock, I think that's pretty simple. You know, you got the Beatles, the Kinks, all doing, you know, the Who, all doing their thing in the 60s, which is this rock instrumentation, but with poppy choruses, poppy melodies. Psychedelic rock. Now, this is what I thought was interesting, because the year before, 1966, the Beatles had done Revolver, which was very psychedelic, very... They focused quite a lot on using a lot of innovative production techniques and new instruments as well. You know, the sitar is heavily focused. What songs are they? There's one called Love You Too and Tomorrow Never Knows from Revolver by the Beatles. So the psychedelic rock, you can kind of hear a year later the Stones give their interpretation of, okay, that's how the Beatles do psych rock. This is how the Stones are going to do it. And the final genre thing is the baroque pop. Now, we have spoken about this a few times, actually. We did it way back, one of the first episodes. I know it was Hendrix, because Hendrix had a harpsichord on one of his songs. But David Bowie, we talked when we did the Hunky Dory episode. That's a baroque pop. And so I kind of had my guess about what baroque pop was, but I went a bit deeper for this episode and just tried to find out what it is. So baroque pop is a fusion genre. But for people who don't know, baroque is a kind of like a style of classical music. There's a few classical music styles. You've got classical music, baroque, romantic music, and these are all eras. You know, I don't know how long they last, a couple of 100 years per era. And this is how, the same way that you have blues to hard rock to heavy metal, that kind of is the same progression in classical music over hundreds of years. So baroque is one of those. Johann Sebastian Bach, one of the most famous baroque composers. So baroque pop is a fusion.
And he wrote loads of stuff for the harpsichord, isn't it?
Say again?
Bach wrote loads of pieces for the harpsichord.
That's it, yeah. So
and that's present in the album. That's
exactly. So we heard harpsichord in Hendrix, we heard it in the Stones, and we heard it in Hunky Dory as well. So baroque pop, a fusion of genre, rock music plus classical music as well, but not necessarily classical music, more about the orchestration and the instruments used. It emerged in the 60s when artists pursued a more orchestral sound, and we spoke about that in depth on Hunky Dory, and there's elements of it here as well. So I just thought I'd sort of clear that up about what baroque pop is. So it's basically rock pop music with classical orchestration and instruments playing. So with that in mind, where do you want to start first, bro? Is there a particular track you wanted to go? Is there a theme of the album, or?
There's a couple of things I actually want to say about the album, and comparing that incarnation of the Stones with the current one, or with whatever they've been doing for the last 30 years. Because if you think about it, like, when you mention the styles in the album, I would say the number one thing that comes to my mind is psychedelic. That's what the album is for me, and it does remind me a lot of the Beach Boys and the Beatles. Especially because of the vocal harmonies, which are not really the strongest feature in the Rolling Stones.
I don't think they ever have been.
Well, exactly. When you see them live with all the session musicians with them, you know, the touring band with them, you have people who are hired specifically to do backing vocals. So that's like that's a specific things. They know what they're doing there. So, but the band, like the Stones as a band, without hiring backing vocalists, doing vocal harmonies, and that's something you don't see them doing nowadays. And also the Stones, they're very famous as a touring band, as a live band. And there was a recent kind of clash between McCartney and Jagger about, Beatles versus the Stones again. I think they do that for, whenever they disappear from the media for too long, they just say some bullshit to get some mentions, I think. And then McCartney said something, the Beatles were like really creative, whatever. I mean, I'm paraphrasing here. I don't know exactly what he said, but he said something. Whilst the Stones were a blues covers band. So, well, yeah. And then Mick Jagger, when asked about that, he was really polite replying to that. He was like, "Oh yeah, no, Paul's a sweetheart, love him." But the Beatles, they had a completely different experience than the Stones, because they were in studio all the time, whilst we decided to be a stadium rock band, which no one has done at the time. So you got to understand that the whole career of the Rolling Stones is based on being a great live act and to play for thousands and thousands of people every night. And I don't think no one managed to pull it off as well as they did for 50 years or more.
Yeah, no, that's a good point,
yeah. So in that sense, when you think about the Stones live, I had the experience to see them in 2006 in Copacabana Beach in Rio de Janeiro, and I saw them live. Or let me say properly, Rio de Janeiro. I mean, why am I saying like Rio de Janeiro?
Rio de Janeiro.
Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. There were only 2 million people in that gig.
Only.
That's a world record, yeah. And I saw them again in Hyde Park. I had a sneak peek of the show, really, because I was playing a gig, so I couldn't come see them. So I finished the gig, and the guitar player, Andy, who plays guitar in the band, was like, "Oh, shall we just go there and check the Stones in Hyde Park?" I mean, we don't have tickets, but I mean, it's just maybe the last 4 or 5 songs, and we managed to get there and see them play the last few songs, and it was the same sort of performance, and it's like a live, fairly heavy, band, and it's all about the guitars all the time.
Mm.
And when you listen, so that's the main difference. When you think about this, is a live stadium rock band. They're playing Hyde Park, they're playing Copacabana Beach, they're playing football stadiums all over the world.
Yeah.
So it has to be really guitar based, because that's how you drive an audience live. But when you listen back to the 60s stuff, they were as psychedelic as everyone else at the time. So I think this album is a product of its time. It's not the Stones as we know them now, or as they have been for most of their career. Plus, having Brian Jones in the album, he was still alive. He was still a member of the band. So that is the thing that, because he quit the band briefly before he died, wasn't he? So they lost him as a band member before they lost him, in this world. So basically, yeah. So Brian Jones was a genius in terms of exploring different instruments and bringing different textures to rock music. So that's the thing. After him, they never ever achieved that sound again. And I think they were really clever by not trying to. They never tried to be the Brian Jones Rolling Stones after he left.
When did he leave?
I don't know. So I think briefly after that, I don't know.
Okay.
That's the thing. I'm not. That's the thing about Stones. I'm not very familiar with the history of the band and the albums. I knew the songs. When I went to see them live for the first time, I was like, "Oh, I know about 6 or 7 songs," and I thought, well, maybe I'll be disappointed because I wasn't a big fan. So I went to the gig, and that's mind blowing. Their live performance, like wow. Even if you don't know the songs. And then after that started, so I'm more familiar with songs than albums, and it's really good that you decided to do this album, because I didn't know. I knew a few songs, not the album itself. So yeah.
Well, it's really interesting because this album, apparently, what I did when I made these lists of all these albums is I kind of sort of found the main bands in rock and roll and hard rock and all that stuff, and then I sort of took note of what people say with their most famous albums. But apparently this was a less well-known record of theirs, and I'm not sure why. Mick Jagger said, or was it Keith Richards, said that this felt like a new beginning for the band, as it was the first time they took a breath and distanced ourselves from touring. So isn't it interesting? You know what? When we talked about Rubber Soul, now I know Rubber Soul isn't the same psychedelically as Revolver is, but we spoke about Rubber Soul and we talked about how Rubber Soul was the first Beatles album where they stopped playing shows and said, listen, let's not just make hits for the sake of it, let's put some effort into an album. And this seems to be like the first one that the Stones have done.
Oh yeah, because and if you're not actually thinking as a live band, you have so much more freedom. Because you can add loads of instruments that you don't necessarily have to take on tour with you, and here's the main thing for me that makes this album different from the current incarnation of the Stones or the Rolling Stones, as most people know, is the fact that the guitar is not the main instrument. This album for me is all about the piano.
Yeah,
it's like you got 2 piano players in the album. It's Jack Nitzsche, so how you pronounce it?
Yeah,
I don't know, and Ian Stewart. Ian Stewart, funny or not, he was a member of the Stones since the beginning, and he was a member of the band when they started. But the producer manager said, like, no, you don't suit the image we need. It looked like a musician, not an artist. So he was excluded from the official lineup, but still playing in the band, and he played with them until he died. So so he was a full-time member of the Stones for his whole life, pretty much, as a musician, and for most of their career, but never got the credit. And he plays such an important role in this album. It's so the album is led by the piano most of the time, in my opinion, including Let's Spend the Night Together.
Well, we discussed it on Hunky Dory as well, didn't we? The relationship between Rick Wakeman and David Bowie on those songs. And you've kind of got the same here, haven't you? You know, there's quite a few... Ruby Tuesday is just the perfect example of the piano and the vocals leading the song and taking it where it needs to be.
Actually, let's talk about that. We talked about the A side of the single. Let's talk about Ruby Tuesday, because there's flute in that song, isn't it? Like
it's called an alto recorder.
All right.
It's like a flute instrument, but there's also a double bass in there. With Bill Wyman playing the double bass. As you mentioned, it was the band's fourth number one, and it just has this. I don't even know how to describe it, man. I can't really put a sort of stylistic label on it. But just the beautiful counter melodies that are going on with that alto recorder, and the bass with the droning notes, and I'm lost for words because I love that song so much. It really is stunning.
What I think is really, really cool about that song is how they don't even build up for the chorus. Like, I think there's no drums until the chorus, and everything comes together. Everything happens at the chorus, and it suddenly stops. Like, and it's a really cool build up, and you have the vocals, like, they're quite soft comparing to the more rock and roll stuff they do. So it's very, very interesting. I mean, it's a very melodic song, and I love one of the lines in the lyrics is "Lose your dreams and you lose your mind." It's fantastic. I love that. I love that line, and it's so lyrically is fantastic, and the chorus is really strong, and the arrangements are amazing. They did a great job. Like, I think the song is flawless. I can't find anything negative about the song at all.
10 out of 10 song. Is it you mentioning about the guitar? You said something about how the guitar wasn't the main instrument, which you are correct about. But there is a couple of songs which does bring us back to the hard rock side of the Rolling Stones. You know, I'm thinking. Well, actually, do you know what? Let's go further back than that. Let's talk about the song Miss Amanda Jones, which is just like a 50s rock and roll tune, isn't it? It's got that guitar.
That is rock and roll.
That could be a Chuck Berry song. It's got the organ pounding behind. This has got to be a homage back to the Rolling Stones and their rock and roll roots.
They never denied those, like, blues rock and roll roots. So it's very Chuck Berry, that song. It sounds a lot like him. And it's straightforward rock and roll. There's no. It's a formula. There's not like they're not experimenting there. Just like, how would Chuck Berry write a song? That's how it goes.
But, sorry, go on.
That song's rock and roll. Another one is I think All Sold Out is because there's the more distorted guitar kind of stuff. And Connection is another one that's led by the guitar. And on my notes, it's funny because I was listening to the album, taking notes, and when it gets to Connection, I've written guitar led. Finally, because up to that point, that's like 1, 2, 3, or the fourth song in the album. So, okay, finally we got some guitar. Not saying that I did enjoy the absence of heavy guitars before that, but it's just like, wow, this is more like the Stones I know. And
I think I agree with you. I think the funny thing about the songs you've just mentioned, plus the two I'm going to mention. So you said Connection and All Sold Out, and I'm going to add to that My Obsession and Complicated. How heavily reliant those four songs are on the drums, and how loud and in your face the drums are throughout the song.
Man, that is the one thing that really stands out in this album. And I would say this wouldn't be a rock album without Charlie Watts.
Yeah.
It would be. It's psychedelic, it's pop, it's like vocal
singer-songwriter
oriented.
thing,
Yeah, it could be any of that, but it wouldn't be rock without Charlie Watts. Especially, let me make sure. Yeah, My Obsession, because there's a drum intro, and it's all about the drums. There's a drum break all the time. They stop and then it goes back to the drums. But as I said before, it sounds like a heavy Motown approach. I'll tell you what was a classic Motown groove. That's pretty easy to understand. But basically, as musicians, we complain all the time about people who clap their hands on 1 and 3, right? So usually the way it goes is you clap on 2 of 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. The 2 and 4 where you're clapping your hands is where the snare drum plays, is the backbeat. We call it the backbeat. So you have some of the verses with a backbeat. So the classic Motown groove, which was basically a formula they were using repeatedly with every single song, is you play the backbeat 1, 2, 3, 4 on the verse, and you play all 4 beats on the snare on the chorus 1, 2, 3, 4. So you have that snare. You go from this 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 to this 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that it gives you an impression of like a double time kind of stuff, but it's not double tempo. It's not, you're not speeding up. You're just playing more of that like a strong, loud instrument, which is the snare drum. So he does loads of that, but a lot heavier than a Motown drummer would do. So it's kind of a pop groove, but in a rock and roll way.
But they've also looked at the other instruments in adding to that. We'll stick with My Obsession. That distorted bass on it. Man, is it a synth or a bass? But anyway, it's heavy. It's like a brow sound. You've got somewhere on there. This is unconfirmed. This is just my guess. There is a thing called a Dane Electro guitar, which was one of the first basses to be made. Now, it was made in the 50s, I think, and what it was a guitar, 6 strings, but the strings were so much thicker, and you got a really low, warm, twangy sound, and you can hear that quite heavily on My Obsession. The famous song is, I can't remember who sang it, but there's a song called Wichita Lineman. It's a country classic, and there is a Dane Electro bass solo in there, and it's probably the most famous example of bass solos and guitar, and Dane Electro solos all together, because it is probably the solo that's kicked off bass solos. So we'll put that in the playlist as usual with the album and the other songs we mentioned. But sticking with the harder rock thing, we did mention it on All Sold Out as well. There's a fantastic blend in this album, isn't there, where they've managed to, we'll take you back a bit to the Animals, and when we spoke about the Animals and how we heard a rock and roll pop band very obviously, and I don't want to say trying to sound like this, because that's a disservice to the Animals, because they did really well, but when the Animals wanted to sound R&B, they sounded R&B. When they wanted to sound rock and roll, they sounded rock and roll, and the same with the blues. One comment I have about this album is that, as in Between the Buttons, no matter what stylistic influences you're hearing in certain songs, the whole album sounds like the Rolling Stones. And I think that's a fantastic testament to their songwriting and their musicianship, that they've been able to take. I mean, listen, I'll just run you through the songs quickly. Yesterday's Paper has some Baroque pop in. Connection, I thought, was a bit Motown-y. She Smiled Sweetly was kind of soul and doo-wop-y. Cool Calm Collected has that honky-tonk music, the music hall kind of song. All Sold Out, hard rock, distorted guitar. My Obsession, a bit R&B. Who's Been Sleeping Here, folky. Miss Amanda Jones, the 50s rock and roll. But whilst I'm listing off these stylistic influences and these genres, none of those songs sounded like the Rolling Stones trying to be a covers band or trying to make, Miss Amanda Jones, let's write a song that sounds like Chuck Berry. It sounds a bit like Chuck Berry, but it is undoubtedly the Rolling Stones. And I think it's just fantastic, the personality and the characteristics they've imprinted on this album. Still paying homage to the music that they loved from years before, but making a completely unique and personal album.
Well, some people say that song "Who's Been Sleeping Here" has a Dylan-esque kind of storytelling style.
Yeah.
Loads of people say that there's harmonica and there's acoustic guitar more than anything else, and it's this kind of storytelling about a woman cheating on her man, and it's like, yeah, but still, it's not Bob Dylan. It's not them trying to be exactly like him.
Do you remember in Hunky Dory where we got those 3 songs where he was actively trying to sound like even Velvet Underground? He actively tried to sound like Bob Dylan. And that was clever in itself because David Bowie's taking his songwriting skills, manipulating his instruments and his voice to try and sound like someone else. But this, I don't know how to describe it because they have taken some of the stuff that Bowie must have had as well, but they've just kept it as a Rolling Stones song, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
The songwriting on this is incredible.
And it's an interesting point where like everyone talks about the genius of Brian Jones, but I think Keith Richards plays such an important role again because it's kind of, the first time he sings on his own with the Rolling Stones and is the last song of the album, Something Happened to Me Yesterday. So he sings the bridge or one of the verses as well. And that's Keith Richards saying, look, I'm a singer, songwriter, guitar player. I'm an important, part of all of this. And Brian Jones was for sure essential to the way they arranged the songs and to the different textures that no other band would have at the time. But that doesn't mean that Mick Jagger and Keith Richards were not as important to the sound of the Rolling Stones, and they were not very creative, because they were. I mean, the amount, and I think again because they were not designing this album to be played live. It means you can do whatever. You can do like actually talking about doing whatever. I want to do a segment.
Oh, go for it. Well, tell us the segment.
How rock and roll is that? So I got the last song, Something Happened to Me Yesterday, which is about an LSD trip.
I read that, yeah.
Yes. The lyrics, right? So the lyrics on the bridge, he don't know if it's right or wrong. Maybe he should tell someone. He's not sure what it was or if it's against the law. So you have a song about probably it's a real story about Keith and Mick getting really high on LSD, doing things that they didn't even know if it's against the law. How rock and roll is that? You give him the number on that one.
That's very rock and roll. The score. So the lyrics of the song about LSD, some crazy trip they went on and they didn't realize what happened. That's rock and roll. Of all, I love songs where the artists don't feel ashamed or the need to hide what their influences were. You got to what's the song the Beatles one, got to get you into my life, which is just about even if you think songs like from bands Cypress Hill, who are this rap group who just speak about how much they love smoking weed. So it's like fuck yeah, like if that's what you like, then sing about it. But for the Stones to do it that early, 1967, and to put to make the basis of the final song on the album about an LSD trip, that is rock and roll. I'm giving that a solid. I'm giving that an 82. That's a solid.
82.
Incredible.
that's a good score. I was going to say,
sticking with that song. That is probably my favourite song on the album, apart from Ruby Tuesday. That's an automatic one. This is probably one of my next favourite songs on the album, and it reminded me a bit of A Day in the Life by the Beatles. The length of it kind of had that storytelling about it as well, and the vast array of instrumentation. You got the 2 minutes in, there's like a big band jazz section with a trumpet, a trombone, and a tuba coming in. I think I heard ukulele or mandolin in there somewhere as well. I could be wrong, but that is. It feels like an underrated song to me, because you've got all these other songs which are fantastic in their own right, but they're just sort of short little 2.5 minutes. One's trying to be a rock and roll song, one's like a little Motown R&B song. This did feel like it in a world of its own, which is why it did remind me of A Day in the Life, which, for those who know the song, it was a staggering Beatles song that was the end of Sergeant Pepper, I think, wasn't it? Which just had a crazy instrumentation, crazy orchestration, amazing production techniques. And I feel like this was that version of the song for this album. I really enjoyed that one.
Yeah, I mean, and again, that's about the freedom of rock and roll, isn't it? You do whatever you want to do. You sing about whatever you want to sing, and you put whatever instruments you want to put into a song. But there's so like it's so much freedom in the whole album. What I find interesting now, it just came to my mind what I said at the beginning about Charlie Watts being what keeps the album a Rolling Stones album, and it makes it a Rolling Stones album. And actually,
you could call him the heartbeat of the album, right?
He is, because the one thing that is solid throughout the whole album, and it's 100% rock and roll all the time, is the drumming.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what makes it a rock album for real, like that. Because even in the most experimental songs, the beat is there and it's strong. And I might say this, because I need to say this, because I think Charlie Watts, alongside Ringo Starr, is one of the most like underrated drummers in history, because people say, "Oh,
hold on. New segment.
Yeah,
we need to talk about Charlie Watts.
we need to talk about Charlie Watts.
So, Felipe, as a drummer, as the expert in this field, tell us a little bit about Charlie Watts. Why was he so important, A, on this album, and B, to rock and roll?
Well, I'm going to quote one of my university teachers, because he said, in case you guys wonder why we're studying Charlie Watts in music universities, because he made millions out of the thing you guys want to do for a living. So that's one thing that drummers should know. And you wouldn't be that successful as a full-time member of a band for your whole life if you're not that good. Talking particularly about this album, about Between the Buttons, is he just managed to lay down the perfect groove for every single song.
There's not a drum beat out of place, is there?
No, and there's I don't know if the album has been remixed to streaming platforms or all the stuff, but the drums are so loud in the mix, and I think there's a reason for that. I think maybe the producer realized that, well, listen, without the beat, those songs, they mean nothing. And it's creative. There's drum breaks, there's loads of drum intros. And Mick Jagger mentioned that he brought shitloads of drums into the studio for I think it was the second song, Yesterday's Papers, isn't it? But he probably used in different songs. So he brought loads of drums to experiment and try stuff. So he wasn't like just, I'm just going to play what is expected from a rock drummer. On the other hand, he played everything there is expected from a rock drummer. So he was experimenting stuff, but he didn't fail to produce a solid, strong, heavy beat. And I must mention She Smiled Sweetly, because it's a slow blues vibe, for your music connoisseurs out there. Is a 12/8 groove, and it's the drums are really loud, as I said, in the mix, and it's just there's only 3 musicians in that song.
Really?
Keith Richards said that he recorded bass, organ, piano, and guitar.
Wow!
So you have Keith Richards playing all the harmonic instruments, and Mick Jagger singing, and you have Charlie Watts. Wow. So that proves that those guys are the core of the Rolling Stones, right? Mm-hmm. Because you had so many, you had Mick Taylor and Ron Wood on guitar, after Brian Jones wasn't in the band anymore, and you had so many lineup changes and stuff, but those 3 guys were the Rolling Stones. And sometimes I think Charlie Watts is underrated, or his importance as a musician in the band is underrated. And he kept the band together for 50 years. And I saw him live, and he had the energy to keep it going for 2 hours, like at the age of probably
I was going to say, even in his old age, he was keeping it, wasn't he?
Well, literally until he died.
Yeah, you're right.
He kept drumming until the last day of his life, and what a legend! And if people don't understand his importance for the history of drumming, you should have another look into it, because he is fantastic.
Well, sticking with the song "She Smiled Sweetly," I thought one thing I noticed a bit in this album was the influence. We spoke about some other genres, and I know you said bluesy, but I heard kind of like a doo-woppy sound as well.
Yeah.
I thought it was really interesting because there was another song, the song "Complicated," where it's got those vocals. It's like ah. Now that really reminded me of some early Frank Zappa because. There was, I don't know the history of doo-wop, so I'm not going to pretend I do, but from what I've listened to and studied myself, it feels like, excuse me, feels like that in the 60s you had this kind of transitional movement where rock musicians were taking doo-wop and sort of rocking it up, if you like. Now, Frank Zappa did it with his first album in 1966. I'll put a song or two in the playlist from that album, which is called Freak Out. But you can really hear how a guy who wants to produce and execute rock music takes something like doo-wop and makes it rocky. And it's in the same kind of vein that they've done here with Complicated. And even, like you said, the song She Smiled Sweetly, I thought that was good as well. But yeah, man, I mean, anything else you want to talk about? Because I feel really lovelily covered the album. We don't need to talk about each song individually, but we've got a real good understanding of what they were doing musically with this album, haven't we?
Yeah, and I think it's as the main idea of the show is always is to encourage people to look back into this rock catalog we have, and so many gems that have been like released in the past that we sometimes don't. I didn't know the album. See, I knew the songs, I knew the singles and stuff, but I didn't know the album. And thanks for bringing that one up because it's phenomenal. I've listened to it like about 3 times in the last few days.
Me too, man. It's been lovely, isn't it?
What an album.
We've done 35 episodes. We've been podcasting for 1 year and 2 months, and we haven't mentioned the Rolling Stones. So I thought we have to get one of them.
And I'll tell you a couple of things. Well, one thing I want to say is like, do you have a favorite song? I want to know if you have a favorite song from the album.
Yeah, so Ruby Tuesday. That's kind of like that's goes without saying. After that, I really liked. I'll give you 3 more after that. Something Happened to Me Yesterday. Who's Been Sleeping Here? And My Obsession. Those are the ones.
Okay. Something Happened to Me Yesterday is one of my favorites as well, but I'll mention one you probably wouldn't think of. Cool, Calm and Collected.
It's interesting, that one.
I love that song because he's talking about high class English women, right? And and it's like, she's so cool, calm and collected, and there's all that like that fake behavior because you need to be posh and stuff. And why that's cool. Not because it's a satire. It's not being mean. I think but it just describes a character so well that I listen to that song and I see a video clip. It's like a movie in my head. And see the elegant woman walking into a room, and it's a ragtime song.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah, it's a honky-tonk ragtime song, isn't it?
It's ragtime. It's not
clanky piano, and that's what you can imagine in the 1920s when they're sitting watching a black and white film and some pianists there going
exactly. And that's what. So it's intentionally like a ragtime song, and Brian Jones is playing the kazoo.
Yes, yeah, he is. Yeah.
It's the funniest kind of timbre you have of all of the layers of sounds they added in the album. The kazoo is the most unexpected one to me.
I'm fairly certain that Queen's Seaside Rendezvous from 1975 was heavily influenced by this song. So we'll stick it in the playlist. You have a listen. What else did you want to say?
One more thing. Yeah, one more thing about this song. It speeds up in the end, and that wasn't planned. That wasn't planned.
Really?
They were jamming, and then I don't know who started speeding up, and they just went to.
Everyone was like, "Fuck it, we have to catch up." Well, bro, I mean, I'm happy to kind of wrap this up because I think really well. And we've spoken about it. I want to draw. I mean, I've got my Laz monologue thing.
Yes, please do it. I love it. It's my favorite.
One thing. Sure. Actually, okay, fine. I'll do my Laz monologue, and then I'll ask you a question. Cool. So, my thoughts on the album. They are a really, really nice collection of songs, and it is an album that I was really pleasantly surprised with. I'm not a huge fan of the blues, and I know the Rolling Stones are quite a blues-based rock and roll band. And so to hear virtually no obvious blues influence on this album was really interesting. And that's the point I'm going to come back to you for. I think the album has its own unique sound, and probably the addition of Brian Jones and his plethora of musical instruments that came in, be them classical like the harpsichord or be them a kazoo. I think it adds to that. And the way that Jones was experimenting with different instruments and sounds was very indicative of the time. You had the Beatles, who had just done Revolver. And I think that's what gave them this unique Baroque pop sound. Brian Jones experimenting with instruments and the producers experimenting with recording techniques. However, that may be the reason for this album not being one of their best sellers and being one of the supposedly less well-known works of the Rolling Stones. But I think it's a great album, purely and simply because despite the wide variety of stylistic and genre influences you can hear on the album, each track only sounds like the Rolling Stones.
That's it.
Thank you.
I'm only doing
I'm going to take a bow after my monologue.
Yeah, I'm only here for the monologue, mate.
That's just what he turns up for. Those are my thoughts on the album. Question for you. And this is what I said earlier. We'll finish off with this. Rolling Stones, as you mentioned at the start, are such a hugely blues-influenced band.
Yeah.
I struggled to hear any obvious blues in this album, which I thought was incredibly interesting. You mentioned that song, She Smiled Sweetly. You said it was bluesy. I can get behind that. I wrote down soul and doo-wop. I think it's
just a drum groove, really.
Yeah. But other than that, I mean, Miss Amanda Jones, you could start thinking towards blues until you hear the guitar riff and the piano, and then it's obvious rock and roll. What do you think about a hugely blues-based band like the Rolling Stones essentially not having any blues on this album, considering the last albums had so much of it?
Oh, actually, and one of the most recent stuff they released is a blues, literally a blues covers album.
Right.
Which they released recently, and I think the blues is their kind of safe place.
Yeah,
I'll say, like, whenever the Rolling Stones need a foundation or they need to refer back to something that's gonna work. You have your formulas that work, a certain groove or a certain style to write your lyrics or whatever. Yeah. Every band has something that is their main characteristic and is something that people recognize them for. And the Stones is this kind of really strong blues influence. And the Blues Police doesn't like them because they think the Stones are not blues. Yeah, but they're not meant to be blues. They're a rock band. They're as bluesy as it gets. I mean, they are the closest to the blues that I think any rock band could possibly get, in my opinion.
Yeah. So do you think? Do you think that? So you're saying that the fact that there is such so little blues on this album, you think that's indicative of them branching out and experimenting and trying new things and sort of going a little bit away from their comfort zone?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the sound of the previous album and the album after this one. So, but I believe they started as a blues band and they were playing like rock and roll.
A lot of their first few albums before this had a lot of blues covers on them. This didn't
exactly. So they started from the blues, and they are definitely back to the blues now in terms of the foundation of that sound. So, as I said, I think the blues is kind of their safe place, right? Mm. When the Stones need to be the Stones, when they need to deliver something that they know people are going to dance to, they know everyone's going to enjoy, they go back to the blues. When I saw them playing for 2 million people, they played a Ray Charles song like we're going to be really bluesy and rock and roll, like it's Chuck Berry and early blues in a slightly heavier way. So they are a rock band playing blues. They're not a blues band. Mm. That's what needs to be mentioned. So people say, oh, they're not blues. Well, they're a rock band playing blues. Mainly, that's what they are. And that's how they kind of managed to keep their career safe for that many decades. I mean, you don't know. Can you mention any other band that survived for more than 15 years? That's insane. Playing live constantly, never stopping. Yeah. I mean, they stopped in the early 80s for maybe 1 year or two, I don't know. But they kept going for all these years because they had a foundation. I think with this album, what they did was like, well, wait a minute. What if as I said, we branch out of this style that people know us for, or this kind of safe place, and do something experimental. Because you can always go back to your roots, which they've been doing, for ages. The live version of the Stones is a much more straightforward blues rock band than some of the albums. And this, I mean, they don't even play Ruby Tuesday live anymore. It's like, they don't do those things because maybe they're not suitable for a live gig for the current incarnation of the Stones, or anyway. But I would say that blues is where they go back to. Blues is where they go back to anytime they need to be the Rolling Stones. Everyone knows. But I think with this album, they just wanted to taste freedom to an extreme level.
And rock and roll is musical freedom, as we've said.
Exactly.
Yeah, fantastic.
And they did really well. Yeah.
Yeah. What a great place to end the episode. Did you like the album?
Oh, I loved it.
It's fantastic, isn't it? Not really bad song.
I wasn't expecting to enjoy every single track, and I did. It's I think I might just listen to it again now.
I know, yeah. I don't want to lead another discussion point because we're going to end it now. But for me, I've said I'm not I love the blues for what it is and what it means. But in terms of what's the first genre of music, if I could choose, I'd put on, it wouldn't be the blues, and it wouldn't be anywhere near the top. You guys know I love my metal, and then I go for some rock, then I go for some classical, then some jazz. Blues is quite far down, but I still love it for what it is. But I think the reason I loved it so much is because it wasn't as bluesy as other Rolling Stone stuff, and they were branching out and doing some more, taking in the folk, taking in the classical stuff, the ragtime music,
That's why it's good, really. It's like, the one thing I'm kind of I kind of regret is taking me so long to actually dig into the Stones material. Because I'll tell you a funny story, a quick one. Because I'm a rock fan, my mum assumed there was a huge Rolling Stones fan, and I liked more the Beatles and Zeppelin and Pink Floyd than Stones. And she kept buying Rolling Stones photo books and all sorts of memorabilia. And I was like, I'm not going to tell her that I'm not a fan because I don't know much about it. I never disliked the Stones, to be fair to them. Like I love them, they're great, but I didn't know much about them. My mom kept buying books and stuff, and I was like, I got all these books about the Stones. I was like, and then I started, knowing more about the stories behind the band than actually knowing the albums, which is really funny. So yeah. Thanks, Mum, for all the Stones memorabilia you gave me all these years. And I live in the same road as the Rolling Stones store here in Broderick Street. So if I walk down the road for 2 minutes, there's a Rolling Stones shop, like big one.
I tell you what, next time I'm down and we hang out, I'm going to go there because I want this album on vinyl. It's really
So the Stones have been chasing me for all these years.
Excellent. Right, well, I think there's a good place to leave it. Thank you so much for joining us again, guys. As usual, you know where to find us on the internet and everything. One thing I will ask is we are an independent podcast that is just me and Felipe running it. We've got no outside support or help. So something that matters a lot is the reviews, because the more reviews we get, the higher up the charts we go, and the more likely we are to be seen by people who don't already know us. It's really quick. If you're on Apple or if you're on Spotify, it's right at the top of the page. Just hit the 5 stars if you like us. Give us a little 5-star rating and then get on with your day. On Apple, you can actually write a little bit if you want to give us a sentence or two about why you love the show so much.
If you can't be bothered writing it, just write fucking brilliant,
Yeah, why not? Yeah, that'd be fantastic.
Laz is sexy. Just write
anything
that.
Like that. Anything.
Yeah.
But those reviews really do go a long way. And you hit play on the episode. If you can just take 10 seconds of your time, scroll down, hit the 5 stars, write great show, and that does the world of good for us. Like I said, we are independent, an independent podcast. And yeah, these are the sort of things that help in this kind of world. So thank you again for joining us, guys. We really hope you've enjoyed this, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, and don't do anything I wouldn't do, and keep on rocking it, everyone.
he's every time I say goodbye to him, like after we do a gig or after you leave or a podcast, he says, "All right, lads, have a good day. Don't do anything I wouldn't do." So
It's a very short list.
That's the staple Felipe line. But anyway, guys, yes, thank you for joining us again, and as always, long live rock and roll.